right, we'll join for a pledge of allegiance, I guess.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Call the Macallen Dam Study Committee meeting to order. With waiting for a consultant, we'll jump to item 3, which is an update on the bond issue for March 12th annual town meeting. Mr. Administrator, you want to?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As you're probably all aware, tonight the town council will be holding a public hearing on a $2 million bond to basically complete the Macallen Dam project, the reconstruction. It's only on the financing tonight. It's not on the merits of the project, because that's what goes on the ballot. It's just to raise and appropriate the money. Part of it.
Todd's coming.
Oh, sorry.
I'm waving at Todd, and he wasn't sure whether to come in.
So, by law, we have to have a 2/3 vote on March 12th to have the bond passed. There are 2 bonds on the ballot this year, one for this and the other is for $12.5 million worth of water system upgrades, which is funded through the water system. Over the next few weeks, it's imperative for the committee to help publicize and reach out to get information out there on what the importance of the dam is and what the reasoning behind the route that we went is. We're trying to get as much information online as we can, but it's also up to, we need help, and that's one of the things we're asking for between now and March 12th. If you can write letters, I know Channel 13 is going to be able to do informational sessions, so we may ask for help there as well from committee members. But that is really it. So, any questions on the funding? Really?
Have we figured out what that translates to in a tax impact?
We do. I don't have it off the top of my head right now. The first year, I believe it's 6 cents. Second year is 23, or estimate.
On 1,000.
Yeah, per 1,000.
Per 1,000.
Again, that number may change because we're also in the process of doing a revaluation. So we should have the numbers on the new town value sometime in April, because we're currently at 75% valuation. So we'll see a significant change there.
Well, this is both a question and a comment. For anybody that's watching on TV, the names that are up on all these name tags don't correspond to the people that are here, because this is for the
So if you could kindly turn those around, thank
The
you.
budget committee is also meeting this evening too.
right, and so that leads
Chime in.
That leads to the question: Do they make a?
They recommend or not recommend the article. My understanding is the budget committee is going to be meeting immediately following the public hearings on the 2 bond articles this evening up here, and they'll make their recommendation.
Okay.
They cannot change it. They only can recommend or not recommend.
Okay, thank you.
If we're gonna write a letter or to a newspaper or talk to someone, is Diane the person for us to clear our sound bites with so that we're not misspeaking?
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Is this a 10-year bond or 20? 20.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Administrator.
Thank you.
Good luck. And just remind everybody in the public that in order to speak, you have to come up here because we are being filmed, so you're on tape. Good mic.
Thank you.
Thanks. Hey, Todd. How you doing? Good. We kind of jumped to item 3, as you probably noticed, on the bond issue. We can go back to the top. I don't know if you provide an update on 60% design plans that we've shared and been on the website. I know one of the big issues we want to talk about is status of the utility vault. And you did your borings and, you did find bedrock, and so you've had to come up with a design that was a compromise of where we're headed. So that, and then
update?
Sure.
Yeah.
So, I think last time we met was in November of 2018, and we were performing subsurface explorations, including borings and test pits on both the left abutment and the right abutment. One of the concerns was that bedrock was potentially too high, causing issues with potentially making the vault subsurface. And this is the vault that controls the equipment for a pneumatic gate. The borings indicated that bedrock was low, probably about 15 plus or minus feet below grade surface, which would support installing a vault that was below grade. But then as we did the test pit, the geometry of the wall was different than anticipated. Basically, there's a thin section of the granite block wall that is facing the riverside that goes down, and then at that point, the wall extends back about 7 feet. So with limited footprint there, part of that wall would need to be removed in order to make the vault completely subsurface. So as a compromise, the design has proceeded assuming that the vault structure would be partially subsurface and then partially above grade. Basically, it would sit on top of that 7-foot portion of the granite block wall that extends backwards on a level slab, and then it would extend above grade about 3 feet. So below roughly the height of the existing black vinyl fence that's there now, but not completely subsurface.
You guys, anybody have quick questions on that? Then we will open up for butter comment in a minute here.
I guess my only comment or question at this point, what you, as far as you've gone in the design, is just, this is like a concrete box that would be
Yes, so the vault itself would be a concrete precast structure, but then the exterior of that could be, plantings or veneered or something like that.
That was some kind of facade.
Yeah, but it's roughly a concrete vault with inside dimensions of 6 foot by 8 foot.
6 feet by what?
8 feet,
8 feet.
Is the exterior roughly 8 by 10 then?
roughly, yes.
I did want to mention that we have sent out a letter to the homeowners or condominium association owners, board of directors, to let them know what the outcome of that evaluation that Todd's group did. And we have sent the plans, and we have a representative here. Not that I mean to put you on the spot, but I did want to, mention that we have done some outreach to the residents. So I don't know if that's filtered down to the actual residents or not in the buildings, but the board of directors of the Bryant Rock Association are aware of the modification to the plans.
Are they in agreement with it?
Well, that's a good question, and I don't want to speak on anyone's behalf. I don't even know if you had a chance to discuss it.
We would
You
have
want
to
to come
bring
up
that,
and talk with us?
We would have to bring that up at our next,
Okay.
board meeting, which is in March.
All right.
I think the opportunity, or this would be a fair statement, opportunity would be there. The bond doesn't constrain us into details of the project afterwards, so the bond is the thing that's immediately in front of us, but I think there'd probably be some room for input on certainly on what kind of materials and what the appearance of it
Well,
might
and
look.
3 feet above ground is certainly better than the first proposal that you came to us with. If the appearance would be important, and the exact location of the ball would be important, so it's not going into the parking area at all.
Yep. Yeah, so that's what, as the design progressed, trying to find a compromise that kind of limits that height to the extent possible. And then understanding that input from the residents would be important with the final design of the exterior.
Were you aware of this change in this letter before now?
Yes.
Okay.
We sent
But-
it out about.
Yeah, I know, but none of the residents got it
Okay.
because we're both owners there and neither one of us has seen it until now.
We sent, we
Yeah,
were told that,
I would assume that the committee stays aware of what's happening.
well, we assumed that you were gonna, when we sent the letter, that would be filtered down,
Yeah.
but certainly,
Well,
you have a copy of it, we have a
I received
letter.
it from John, I don't know, I would have to check with
Okay.
him and see if he sent it to everyone else.
Okay. If you could do that, I think it would be helpful to get their feedback and buy-in early in the process.
Did you say they don't meet again until March? Do they typically just meet quarterly, or? So, if that's the case, would there be any, I feel that that could be problematic with design.
Depending upon if we go out
Not
to
for
bid.
voting for the bond, I'm talking to get a final design. If the board's not on board with something that's proposed and it takes that many months to have another meeting, they're obviously gonna meet and discuss this letter probably at that meeting.
Yeah.
And then there won't be any kind of response until after that, so now we're talking June probably for the you see what I'm saying?
Well, let's talk about the
No, I
schedule.
think,
And-
I can check with our other board members and see if we can hold this
Special meeting and maybe like get feedback, because that, I see that being quite a
Unfortunately,
process.
we got the letter just after we had held the meeting, so.
It always seems that.
Where they don't meet monthly, I think we
understand.
need to
Yeah.
maybe try to address that somehow.
Do you have a smaller group that would kind of look at design issues like that, so that you kind of present an option to your membership? Is that the way it would work there?
Well, we have a small board that.
Yeah, the board could kind of
Yeah.
negotiate that.
I just wanted to emphasize that we're on a very tight time schedule, and the anticipation is if the bond issue is approved, that we would go out to bid immediately, get the pricing nailed down, so that we'll be in a good position to order the gates, which apparently has a 6 to 8 month time frame. Is that correct? Has
For
that
the
changed
pneumatic,
since our
I think
last?
3 to 4 months.
3 to 4 months, okay, but we just wanna make sure that we stay ahead of the timeline, because we are under some time constraints with respect to when the drawdown can occur, at the most ideal time from a fishery standpoint, so, I think we wanna just be mindful of that, and meanwhile, construction costs are going up all the time, and,
When are
I
we
hate-
expecting final design to go out to bid? What was the schedule, or what is the schedule?
So right now, we don't have like a final date that we're targeting. We were targeting having everything complete mid-February, and that's something we're in the process of working on. The original schedule was targeting bringing this to bid following the vote in March, so April timeframe. So we're doing everything we can to accelerate that timeline and kind of work through that process.
Goal would be to get it out to bid before the vote with a clause that's in there that talks about if funding is approved. So that we have everything ready, if the bond passes, or hopefully the bond will pass, we can move right ahead with awarding the project. If we go out after that period, it does get a little dicey on timing for ordering of the gates, and that's what our concern is right now.
Rick?
Just to comment on that first, I have 2 comments. It's gonna be a complete bid package, correct? Not piecemeal, so you need final design to get to that point. Until the abutters are in agreement, we can't have a final design, because they may say, no, you're not putting that in here, correct? Am I misspeaking? I mean,
No,
I'm not trying
I
to,
think
so what I'm saying is, we're not gonna have a final design until everybody with Bryant Rock and Fish and Game, I don't know if there are any issues with you guys on your side, but in the book exchange, that's all ironed out. But
I think Todd has worked closely with
Yeah, so-
Fish and Game, and I don't wanna speak for you, but Durham Book Exchange has been in touch with you, and
so I guess my question would be to Todd, is there any other concerns other than the vault with the project?
So there are minor modifications to the design that are being incorporated based on feedback from Fish and Game as well as the Durham Book Exchange. So like you said, there are multiple parties involved, given that town doesn't actually own the abutting properties. So I agree with you that that's certainly something we're working on juggling, and something that we need to iron out as quickly as possible.
I see people meeting quarterly as a problem in getting this to a final design. So somehow we need to address that or request, I believe, appropriately would be to address, see if we can get them to have a special meeting and maybe meet in sooner than later. I don't know what that requires with their rules and regulations and all that
Are
stuff.
you talking about Bryant Rock?
Yeah.
Yes.
I had just said that I would talk to our board
Yeah.
president about holding a special
Oh,
meeting.
you have the
So I
ability
think
to
that's
do that.
already
It is an
addressed.
ability, it's not like a lot of hoops to jump through and all that.
Right, no,
But, yeah, I
no, I
see.
mean, it's not that.
It's not like municipal government.
So I feel that's really important when it
Yeah,
comes to
no,
this.
I've written that down.
And I agree that that's one of the challenges with accelerating the schedule up beyond as much as possible, trying to get all the abutters' feedback both solicited and incorporated within the design as
And
that
have a
progresses.
final
Yes,
bid package to put out,
yes.
so.
And with the town understanding that, like, final pricing is very important, getting that as set in stone as possible
Yeah.
is very beneficial to the town.
I don't think we understood the urgency of, the whole situation, so I apologize for that.
I don't mean to sound negative about anything either, if I'm coming across that way, I'm just trying to make sure everybody's aware of how that process, because that takes time, and you need time to meet with your people and get approvals, and so,
And I don't think, no apologies needed. I think you have a volunteer board that meets kind of, during the holidays, things kind of, time moves on, so that's where we find. I think the only question I had about when your board meets, I think the sort of the location is pretty well worked out. It's not, there's not, the scope of what you have to sort of approve and think about now is, and the facade details, I mean, the choice of whether it had a brick facade or a rock facade is not gonna change it so much. Does that have to be in the final design?
Correct, it could be, but that's a relatively minor detail to finalize. In terms of the location we're looking at now, that's not really subject to change at this point, based on feedback from the abutters and the committee. That's looking to be, kind of in that dirt, grass parcel outside of the parking, not to impact parking spaces. So that location itself is pretty well set. Now we're looking at the height, that has been a change since November.
So I think it more or less, it comes down to it's almost an informing thing and then a vote from, there's not a lot of design things that are, that, there's plantings that you can do afterwards and there's a choice of a veneer, and I'm not hearing a lot of other decisions to be made around that. Is that a fair statement of how that might work?
I just have one question. Is what you're looking for just the approval of the Bryant Rock Board to go ahead with this? Is that what we're looking for? The approval from the board at Bryant Rock?
we're looking to be able to have final design
Yeah,
and
But
specs
that's
to put this out
just
to
the fact
bid,
that they're gonna say it's okay is what we're looking for.
essentially,
Yeah?
yes,
Okay,
yes.
so,
And-
all right.
I guess, and I'm not familiar with how your bylaws are written, but, does the board of directors have authority, or do you need a vote from the committee?
That's a
I mean,
very
from the
good question. As
residents?
far as I'm concerned, it seems like to me, I've been there 5 years now, that it's a 5-person board, and they basically do everything
They call the shots.
on their own. They call the shots. We never have any input really into what goes
That's
on.
typical of how it works.
Yeah, and because I lived in another condo in Boston, and it was run the same way.
If they say we're paving the parking lot, we're paving the
Yeah,
parking lot,
right,
you don't get to vote
exactly.
on it.
So, I guess what we're asking them to do is just to have a special meeting of the board to okay this?
That's not.
Yes.
Is that,
That's,
Yes.
is that basically it?
And we do have open meetings, invite residents.
No, I know, but what I'm saying, that's new though. That's new. Because when I first came here, nobody went to board meetings. That's, you guys are changing things, and that's appreciated.
We don't
Yeah.
need to get into that.
No, I know.
We'd like to know that, the majority of people from Bryant Rock are
Yeah.
in support of the concept. And we are more than willing to work with you to help come up with a design that is most palatable and that people can agree with. And we could, I suppose, put some alternate in the bid documents, you know, if it came down to whether it's brick veneer versus, granite, stone, fieldstone, whatever, that I suppose we could work that as an alternate in the bid scheme of things, but, I think the earlier we get input, the better we'll be able to respond and get that clarified, so going forward, we know what we're dealing with.
I think the easiest thing to do in that, I mean, obviously getting Bryant Rock on it, but having allowances for landscaping and our plantings in that area, and having an allowance for brick / stone or whatever it may be, or painted or whatever, would be the easiest way, and then we can approach it after, once things are approved to move forward. We'll have the funding sitting there to do that. I don't think, as the design goes, that landscaping around that particular item would be a hindrance to getting this thing out to bid, especially since we can hit it with allowances. The biggest issue we're dealing with is really the timing of the gates and the timing of the drawdown, and that's what we're trying to avoid, is basically getting into a situation where we can't get the job done in the time
That's
allotted.
Bryant Rock, but what about Fish and Game? Are they on board?
Well, let's talk about
Well,
that.
let's,
Oh.
we have Cherie here and.
So Todd, I was gonna ask, so
Mr. Diane.
how is the permitting, how is the, you guys, why don't you fill us in on?
So we've been, I guess, updating Fish and Game with the progress prints as they've been coming. We've submitted 30% plans, received comments, incorporated those, provided 60% plans, and I can't speak for Fish and Game to say that they've officially approved it, but I think we are in the process of having those discussions. In terms of the permits, the wetlands, DES, Army Corps permit was submitted a few weeks ago. There was a Concom meeting to discuss the project, at which the project was presented and then approved unanimously. And then I guess the remaining permit would then be the dam safety permit, which comes essentially with 100% design plans and specs. So we have been in communication with New Hampshire DES Dam Bureau, letting them know of pretty much an accelerated schedule. They have been provided the 60% design plans. They've done a first check, have not seen anything that is an issue at that point, but has not done a full review. So we are in communication with the Dam Bureau, keeping them up to date as the project progresses as well.
Cherie, Mike, do you have anything to add there, or?
So we're in the process of developing a letter for the drawdown. And they're just conditions based on the timing that is presented to us. And we have a suite of questions on the 60% design plan that we intend to submit to you by early next week.
Well, like the folks up there at condos, it's details, working on details, so 100% plans.
There's no showstopper here.
No.
Okay, good,
That's what we wanted.
good. So you've worked out the drawdown timing and everything? You know,
We're still awaiting the letter.
oh, you're waiting, oh,
Potentially
okay,
this
okay.
week,
That's part of the
Do
letter.
you think?
The end of this week or beginning of next week.
And then, likewise with the Durham Book Exchange, we did receive a phone call regarding review of the 60% design plans, or basically the permit level plans. That was a follow-up to abutter notifications, specifically requesting a 6-foot alleyway within the property rights of the Durham Book Exchange. So we are currently updating the design to accommodate that as well. Again, not major changes in terms of the overall scope of the project, but details that are being finalized and worked through.
Okay.
So we.
Sir, did you have something you wanted to add?
No, that's fine, because I've made multiple calls, and on one night, you just want the change from 36 inches to 72. That's, and, you know, where it's gonna attach to the building
At the end.
at the end.
Yep. So I think there's some minor details to work out with that potentially we could do later, but like we said, we're in the works of finalizing that.
So what is the target for when this bid package goes out, Mr. DRB?
The goal right now is, if we can get to a point where Todd feels comfortable and we feel comfortable, we'd like to get it out in the latter half of February. And then there's gonna be a period of time that we have to give obviously notification, there's, could be addendum questions that have to be answered and things like that. So we're looking for really more of a April bid opening. And then, of course, we have to go through the first reading, the second reading. So probably the award is right around May at this point. And so then if you fast forward that 4 to 5 months, you can see we're right in that target area where we need to be. So it kind of puts some important time places to where we're at.
Right.
If we put it out much later than that, then we may be missing our opportunity timing for not only getting the gates but the drawdown.
Right, but I think what I'm hearing you say is that sending the package out second half of February, which is the most immediate deadline, is that works.
That does, yes.
That works.
Yeah, and Todd and I have spoken about that, was it last week? Week before, I can't remember.
Probably 2 weeks ago.
So we discussed that and how we can get to that point and try to make it so it is workable.
Yeah. So I think in terms of the board of directors, if you had a decision from them back, a ratification from the board of directors in the next, say, by 2 weeks, that would be reasonable to work, or we could do it.
I feel comfortable with that, but I can't answer for Todd. I mean, like I said, I'd be looking at, as long as they're happy with the 3 feet protruding, the landscaping and what we make it look like around it, I think is a, I hate to say it this way, a minor detail. It's not, but it's in the scope of the project, it's the small part of it.
Right, it doesn't have to be worked out to final level.
No, we don't have to get down to the boxwood that's gonna be planted here.
Right, we're just gonna.
And I like your idea, and allow it so we can decide those things later.
Correct.
Yeah.
And it gives us that flexibility.
But I think that, so that's kind of the time frame we're looking for from anybody that has to,
So within the next couple of weeks.
within the next couple of weeks, just sort of would what you'd be looking for is a letter of board saying we reviewed and understand how the project is proceeding, something to that effect.
Yes.
Comfortable with that.
It's good, so, as far as the bond goes, so, it's either 2 million or not, right? I mean, I was just curious how, if the bids come in much lower than 2 million, it's probably a question for Steve, but,
I would say that with the other projects that I've worked on in the town where we have bonds, we don't necessarily have to actually purchase the full amount of the bond if it comes in
I see.
less.
I see.
The good part about this is that with this kind of timeline, if the voters approve, it's approving up to an expenditure of $2 million, or excuse me, not expenditure, but to authorize obtaining a bond up to $2 million. If this project comes in at a lesser amount, you borrow the lesser amount.
I see.
And then keep in mind, the bid is, we also carry a contingency amount in there for the unforeseen, so you're gonna have the bid plus a contingency amount that will be there, but.
Isn't the contingency included? I thought there was a 30.
There is a contingency
That's
included,
included in
and that's,
that 2 million.
That is already included in there, yes.
and at the time that we established that cost estimate, we understood that we needed to have a contingency of that size, because we were only at 60%
Yep.
design or completion of the design. So there were more unknowns at that point than there are now.
Yeah, and that
But
was
affects
well
the
discussed at
audit,
that point,
right.
yes.
And I think the powers that be understood that going forward.
Right. I mean, initially, we had talked about a cost number that was closer to $1.5 million, but based on the amount of unknowns we still had, the understanding was we needed to bond for a higher amount to make sure that we didn't fall short at the time. If it was approved, we don't, the last thing we want to do is, this is kind of a do it or don't do it, so you can't cut out something very easy from the project. So the contingency is to bond for more money than was initially expected. Not because cost estimates are higher, but because
We had,
unknowns are
as the design went further along, some of the things that had to be done or had to be met as part of the design did increase some of the costing, but we also added the contingency, and knowing that you need a contingency. You can't build something without having that back there, because you'll run into something. And so that's how we ended up getting to the last number. So,
Which I like the way you look, it's an up to number.
it is an up to number.
So we had to increase the ceiling for approval, I guess.
Love it to come in less, lot less. That would be wonderful.
And I think one of the points that we discussed as a group is the earlier we can get the project out to bid, the more favorable the bidding climate will be. Hopefully, we'll have a greater number of bidders, which will, just keep the cost down.
Right.
We
Steve has that in
learned-
his administrator's report, that he uses the example of the downtown pedestrian project.
Right.
With the crosswalks and stuff on that, where the bids went out really late and everybody was already sort of taken for the season.
Exactly.
So what we're trying to avoid that happening by alerting people this project is out there in time for people to.
We want to get as many qualified bidders to submit on this as possible. You're going to get the best pricing structures. And the longer we wait in the season, those bidders are already booked up, and they're not going to take on additional work because they can't handle the work, an additional workload.
Are we gonna require pre-qualification for the bids?
There would typically be some level of technical capabilities that would be required as a pre-bid, specifically working with gate structures, work on dams, minimal years of experience, things like that.
Would you, I don't know if this kind of put you on the spot, but, would you be able to provide kind of a rough O&M cost for this? Or, I don't know, maybe we back into that, right, or maybe we figure it out later. So, I mean, there's a lifespan to the.
We have
system.
those, we have that stuff, and back when, if you remember, when we started talking this, I did a lot of research on that to look at what are the life cycles of the airbag, the straps that hold the bag in place, and what type of costs that we would be faced with that as we go down the line. It is a relatively maintenance-free system. You do have an air compressor, you have an air dryer, that is gonna require regular service, changing the oil, cleaning the filter, so on and so forth. But as for the spillway itself, there is not a lot of maintenance that we will have to do. We'll target the strap replacements, we'll target the airbag replacement, but the airbag replacement is 30 years out. And the straps, they're saying every 10 years. So we have those figures and we know what they look like, so there is that certain level of that.
This is just a curiosity question, but does it, I won't take much time, but it makes me wonder, what's it like now when a tree comes, we're always getting trees hang up there when you get high water events, a tree gets hung up on the dam, will that?
I can only give you my opinion. I know Rick has to deal with the way it is right now, but under the spillway design, it's a metal plate. So as that comes over, the bags are actually on behind it. So in theory, you could drop that and whatever's caught on it would move forward. I know Rick brings his crews out to lift trees and things like that out of there.
If it doesn't go on its own and gets all caught up, like you see, we go twitch it out over the through fishing game side. Sometimes we can't reach, we have to take the fence apart, pull it up in the parking lot. That's kind of the process.
I would assume, and again, I'm saying assume, that the design of this would actually create less fetching up of material just by the way it's designed. And I know when I did the due diligence on looking at that, that wasn't a factor that they had brought up in any of the kind of areas. And there's, what, 6 of these in New Hampshire?
I'm not sure the exact number.
Yeah, there's
But there's multiple owned by the Stamp Bureau. And Jim Weber in communications has said that he hasn't really seen major problems with that.
I know we had a pretty good sized pine tree hung up there for a while.
There's a lot of stuff there right now that makes it easy to catch and hang up, so I think the design will help make it a little more slippery to go on its own.
Good.
Any other questions?
Can I ask a question about public information? We've all been participating in paying attention to the realities, and I'm sensing the public hasn't. And I'm seeing, hearing at coffee shop and yoga class, et cetera, a lot of misinformation. Even on a couple of Facebook pages, there's been gross misinformation about what is actually supposed to be voted on, and about the cost difference between repair versus demolish, et cetera. Is there a process that the committee's gonna go through to prepare the public just before?
We had talked about, and we want to get some input and feedback from the committee. We talked about a number of things, possibly doing a 3-part folder and maybe, getting it out to the public at different locations. Possibly having a public information meeting, where we have a list from when we had the extensive public participation phase previously, bringing, the stakeholders, the broader community together and giving them the opportunity to review the plans and so forth. And we also talked about maybe doing a segment on Channel 13. We have a wonderful, cable television service available to the town, and I have been in touch with Tim, who's the videographer who does a lot of these meetings, and he's very interested in working with us if we'd like to do some kind of a short presentation and then have that be aired on Channel 13. We could do that. We used to do a segment when the former town administrator was here. If you had a question, ask the administrator, and we had different subjects, and it was sort of a one-on-one interview. But there's a number of approaches we could use, and I'm certainly willing to put in some extra work and effort to make that happen. And it would be nice to work with some of the volunteers on that and help us get the word out to people.
It might be worthwhile to try to, and I don't know if this is allowed, but if one of the first things we did was to put together an FAQ document of some
Right.
type. Because you could, there, as you said, some of the things that, what you realize when, some of the letters I've gotten as counselor is people that are making broad statements about the question of dam removal without knowing how 6 years ago we were holding meetings where those, we went over at some length those exact questions. There are a lot of things that have been suggested that we spent hours on a long time ago, and I think some of that information, I'm used to bringing that up in conversation, but it's probably well worthwhile, having a collective narrative that represents sort of the experience of a lot of the people that have been working on this project for a long time.
Yes, yeah.
Just a short soundbite for people. Most people are living their lives. They're not following this, but then they've got to go vote. So
Right.
a soundbite that they're going to see on the Facebook pages that are relevant to Newmarket will have a positive impact if the facts are in that
Right.
very short soundbite.
Well, for example, one of the letters we got made comments about what it would cost for dam removal, but the person wasn't involved in the process when we had a document. We had the engineering study that looked at dam removal and was talking about what it would cost to do testing up above to look for sediments that may be contaminated, and the potential of have to remove contaminated sediments before we would remove the dam. It sounded expensive. It would have cost more engineering money to get an answer to the question of exactly how expensive it was going to be.
Endless studies. Endless studies, expensive studies.
Expensive studies to find an exact answer to that question, and we were in a setting where there essentially was nobody that was willing to speak publicly saying, we think the dam should go. The people may have thought that, but nobody was going to stand up and say that.
And the other biggest thing was they had proved by their model, with the dam gone, people will still flood when there's flooding.
Right.
It's not gonna make that go away.
I remember all that, but that's not.
Right, so I think,
Unfortunately,
those
the
two-
information and minutes are all out there, and I think the town does a great job of putting stuff out there with the internet and everything today. The people that don't have the correct information and want it, it's available to them now, and it has been.
right. I'm not, but I think it would make it, the
And I
key
understand
questions
just
out
a
there.
little one-page simple
Right.
thing to read.
You could
doesn't
even
take
direct
8
people
hours
to
of
the
paperwork.
minutes if you felt it would help
I
you.
was gonna say,
Because most people aren't
I
gonna.
have 8 notebooks this size in my office, starting from 2010, documenting that whole process. And
I actually went back.
anybody who's interested can come into my office and do some extensive study if they would like to see, you know, the discussions that we had and the conclusions that were drawn and the rationale for it.
I actually went back today online and looked at the minutes from back in 2014 and meetings before that. And in particular, looking at dam removal. And back then, it was almost $1 million in 2014. And
With
like
no
you said,
studies,
studies.
with no studies.
With
No,
no-
well,
Right.
studies and removal and whatever. And, you know, it is available, you can see it, you know.
Right, and Fish and Game is here. You know, one of the things that was commented about is that it wasn't without a lot of work, we, you know, again, engineering studies to find out, it wasn't automatically clear that it was going to improve fish passage. Yeah, and, you know, it might have required some modification under the bridge to improve fish passage. So, you know, it's very different. The environmental rationale for removing this dam is different from the environmental rationale for the dam in Durham, where you have an anoxic pond impoundment up ahead, whereas this one, fish passage is pretty good. Would you say that's a fair statement?
Fish passage is good here, yes, that's a fair statement.
Okay.
Wouldn't it be really important and helpful and important for this committee to have a public hearing prior to the bond vote, say late in February?
Well, that's one of the options, we could have a public information
I would think
meeting.
that'd be a really good thing to do personally.
And, you know, try to
Not
get
a bad
the word
idea.
out to people, and we could have the gentleman from Channel 13, you know, film that, and maybe do some eyewitness interviews with some of the committee members and some of our stakeholders who've been working in partnership with us since the beginning, and get some feedback from them. I think, you know, that would be, I think, a helpful process.
I think so.
And you know, it's also worth, again, I think one of the good things about is that the gate control, it's not, one of the things that happens by the sort of refurbishment of the dam and redoing the gates is that will allow better water control during high water events, and that also will help fish passage better than what we have now, where sometimes that's, you know, it's been more difficult to, you know, we'd have to open the gates less often under these circumstances because the spillway is wider and it's easy to raise and lower it without,
It is automated,
yeah,
so very different than the current way it's done.
right. So there are a number of there's sort of environmental advantages to this project, I think is a fair statement.
So, I think it is a good idea. I do like your idea of kind of public hearing. We probably do have to work on a narrative.
PowerPoint.
Of what, PowerPoint?
PowerPoint.
For the hearing? Or to
Or
put
for
on?
the hearing. Or, you know, and I prefer to call it a public information
Yeah.
meeting as opposed to a hearing, which has
Yeah.
The hearing is
legislative
tonight.
requirement.
Yeah, public
We're having a
information
hearing,
meeting.
or
Public
the
information,
town council is
whatever.
having a hearing this evening. But a public information
Let's call it
meeting or
public
a public
information.
forum
Yeah.
has less of an edge to it.
Did we have anything left over from previous, you know, just a sort of the chronology of when this started, you know, like a list, you know?
We could put one together.
I mean, I think that'd be helpful.
We don't really have a scribe who sits and
No,
takes
I
notes.
didn't, I don't know, from previous public information meetings, did we start with the chronology, you know, did we have some sort of summary that we could build on? I don't know, maybe that's not worth trying to go back.
Maybe we could put something together.
Yeah, you could almost, you could figure out the chronology by looking at, at the time, 6 years ago was when, I started on the council, and that was at the time where, you had, that was just working on the study for dam removal, right? Those were the framework for those hearings that were being held back then. But you already had the Wright-Pierce study that had been done at some previous time. So.
Didn't this start really in 2008?
It was the original letter of deficiency
Yeah,
came in
the
2008.
Administrative order.
And
type
there was
business.
some preliminary work that Rick coordinated with Underwood, Wright Pierce Engineers. And then there was that town
There was a
petition.
special petition
Yeah.
article
Which-
about removals, then they looked at all that.
Yeah.
We did look at that, very in depth, and there
Yeah.
was a lot of big ticket items that we needed to waste our time and money, because we knew it was big bucks to do those. And then as soon as we had that model that said it was still gonna flood, everybody was like, well, why are we looking at that? We're gonna spend more money at doing removal than, essentially, than $2 million at the end of the day.
Right. And it was hard to move in that direction anyway.
was really hard to-
Because there was no visible support for removal
No.
at that time. We had lots of public input, and it was very one-sided.
Well, the initial interest was for flood mitigation.
Yep.
After Twin Rivers got flooded out there in 2006, the thought was, let's remove the dam, which was the impetus for that referendum.
I was a believer back then that with the dam going, there'd be no flooding. I didn't think the place would flood,
Right,
and
right.
the model proves that it will.
Right, and the other thing that was kind of, I think, important part of the history, and it's interesting, is that, the Dam Bureau was quite helpful, but early on, when we were talking about what our alternatives, keeping the current height of the dam was not something that our engineering consultant had put in there as an option. They were listing the option to keep the current height of the dam involved doubling the width of the spillway, which is,
Right.
which was, the answer was you couldn't do that. It was only after Dam Bureau brought to our attention that there was an option to, what the word used initially was armor the area around the dam, which is mean to work on the embankments and that. So that's how we got there. For a long time, the discussion looked like we had no choice but to dramatically alter the height of the dam, and so much that the dam seemed to. What was the point of keeping it?
And that was from the administrative order, because we had to increase the spillway capacity, and that was the only way to do that.
Right. But they said, no, they gave us the option to armor around that, and that's when people, at that point, with all of the public input telling us how much they loved the dam for a variety of reasons. Many different people had reasons why they loved the dam and felt it was important. But, and again, the fishway worked well. There was really no voice that was saying that there was a clear advantage to removing the dam. It wasn't clear it was gonna save any money. It was gonna cost us a lot of money to find out, and then the real possibility it was gonna cost us more money if we got rid of the dam. Might have got grants, all those things, but again, in the absence of anybody that said that's what we wanna do, this is a public body. We listen to what the public is saying. So that's how we got here.
All right, well, we got a little bit of work to do. I'd be willing to help, with the narrative.
Me too.
Willa, are you available?
Who's gonna follow up with
Some
Brian
of the
Roth?
stuff?
Imagine Todd
Todd's gonna do that?
or
I can certainly, I've been
Or
Todd has some
contacted
great
him, so-
slides that or photographs rather, that he's taken, and, has a great PowerPoint presentation that maybe could be modified, maybe less emphasis on the technical.
Yeah, I can work, with Diane to communicate with them is the
My
best.
understanding is that the two major issues were losing parking space and messing with view. I think those have been resolved. I think I'm a member, I live on the waterfall. I think those issues have been resolved, and I think the community understands that. I think Audrey has the ability to deal with a meeting fast, and I think the residents understand and trust that the issues that were of concern have already been resolved.
So maybe she can just
I think she
do
can
an
do it
email
fast.
request for the meeting and include Greg and somebody who has been in the loop with the committee, so we know it's moving.
Well, yeah, I was
Is that-
assuming we would just meet and discuss it as soon as possible and get back to you as
They
soon
may
as
not
possible.
even need to physically meet.
Should we, if we do a letter, email it to you?
That would be fine,
And,
yeah.
and after talking, I will run this by our president, our board president, and if he feels it would be helpful to have one of you at the meeting, could I email?
I think that one of us I could very
Or if you
easily,
could
I know
talk
John,
about
I mean, if you guys
Yeah.
have a meeting, I know the people on the board, most of them, just invite us to come
Well,
too if you want.
It
I
ought to
mean,
be able to happen electronically.
yeah, it could, very
I'm-
easily.
It shouldn't have to be
Yeah.
a meeting.
Yeah.
But if you
wanna
need
do it
feedback or
quickly,
you
might
want
do it
feedback,
that way.
we're available.
Okay, that's good.
My only comment to this is, instead of making an assumption, just that we're in the loop, like, okay, the meeting is February 1st, and we're gonna like, so we know, you see what I'm saying? I just don't wanna assume it's happening and then find out a date hasn't been, you know what I'm saying?
Let's stay on top of
Yeah,
Can you
it.
just
so
put-
who
you're
should we communicate that to
If
you?
you could communicate directly with me, that would be
Okay.
helpful.
When
and
you're
I
gonna
have-
meet, so she knows
Yeah.
there's a, yes.
And I'm happy to come, and probably Greg could join me.
Sure.
You know, if you'd like some people to come and talk about the project
Okay.
and our experience with it, and, you know, we certainly would entertain any questions, via email, and we can get back, you know, to people with responses if they have inquiries about it, about the process.
Sounds good.
Is that good?
So I'll get back to you with
Okay, that would be
within
great,
the
Audrey.
next, couple of days.
Okay, thank you, and I will
About
share the
for plan of
information with
action.
everyone. Very good, thank you.
Thank you.
Do you wanna, are you planning to schedule a smaller FAQ type or a narrative group or something like that?
Well, that's what I was gonna say, it'd be helpful to have maybe one or two people to work with me, to help
Bill and I?
ferret out some of these questions and,
Or anybody else who wants. I mean, we could do it by email a lot, most of it,
Yeah.
not all of it.
I'll help
it
out.
would be, it's helpful to hear what some of the questions that have been asked out on the street.
I have pretty,
And I
have a
think
lot of
some people have
experience with
already
There-
commented to
There's a,
me.
there's a lot of people that think we're removing the dam. For
But
whatever
that's-
reason, there's a big
We need to
perception.
communicate.
It's
that
crazy.
And
There's a
that's crazy.
dam removal, and that's what this is about, with
A lot
this
of
2
people think
million.
we should remove the dam.
And
I've
that.
heard everything from, well, why aren't we considering hydroelectric?
They don't sleep
Power,
there.
you know, I mean, and these again are the same questions that we answered over and over again during our earlier deliberations.
there's always gonna be the, you know, the rumors and stuff, I mean, but if you put the information out there, it's,
Well, that's my hope, is
You
we
know.
get the information out on the website and, you know, have literature available, maybe the town clerk's office as appropriate. That will go a long way, putting some stuff on the website. Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
so that's good.
Shall we adjourn?
Yep,
So moved.
unless there's anything else.
Anybody wants to can come to the town council
Leo,
tonight.
you've been quiet today.
Meeting adjourned.